Seconds.
We're live.
We're live. Oh, sorry.
Those immediate live stream kickoff jitters. That's fine.
Yeah.
We'll just continue with it, and I'll introduce things. Hello and welcome to the final of part 1. In these live streams, we've covered the entirety. By the end of this live stream, we'll have covered the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 1, from Iron Man to the Avengers. How do we feel about that?
It's been a wild ride. I've only been here for half of it, but hey, you know,
this is my first time.
Some Marvel talk, and hey, we missed out on my least favorite ones. Hulk and it was Thor.
Yeah.
And
Iron Man 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes.
So 6 movies in. It's pretty intense. Things have changed. We've gone from I am Iron Man to Earth's Mightiest Heroes. That's what we're calling ourselves. That's quite the change. So
we've gone from no one remembers his name to Don Cheadle. You know, good time.
Exactly, it's perfect. So just going to give a brief overview for anyone who's joining us on this one. This is in the lead up to Infinity War. We're going over each of the Marvel Cinematic Universe films, rewatching them like a book club, and then just talking about them, having a brief critical analysis, and then talking about like what they mean and how they fit into the wider picture. So this week we are discussing Captain America, the First Avenger, and also the Avengers, or as we Brits call it, Avengers Assemble.
Yes. Good fun.
So where should we begin? Let's begin with Captain America, the First Avenger. Let's just begin with the movie. Emma, you are our resident expert on that movie. So do you want to give a brief little overview of what the movie is?
Well, it's about Captain America.
Nice. Okay.
And he goes from being a tiny, skinny boy who doesn't know when to give up the fight to being this big super soldier man. And he has to try and take down essentially magical Nazis.
Yeah,
that's a pretty good summary.
Yeah,
how do you feel that this movie stands apart from the rest of the prior movies?
I like it because it's set earlier. And it's set in like when's World War II?
1940s.
The 1940s. So it like shows a different time period for superheroes, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah. An entirely different culture.
Yeah.
Arguably, with Iron Man 2, the direct sequel aside, you could talk about how every single one of these movies has presented superheroes from a different kind of cultural perspective, with Iron Man being the sort of traditional self-made, well-to-do hero, and then you've got the Hulk, who's kind of like the villainy, he's afraid of himself.
Yeah,
and then
anti-hero.
Thor being the god, with Captain America being in the past. They each present a different lens. Ibby, what do you think about the character himself, the superhero Captain America? How does he differ from the rest?
I am actually quite fond of how it's very much his personality that drives him, as opposed to just his super strength. So that's how he differs very much from the other characters, is that, you know, he doesn't originally have this strength, but he does have strength of character, and he's like, you know, a morally righteous, I would say, person. And it is that attracts me to the character, rather than the fact he can, you know, hit people through walls.
It's a very, very good point. James, what do you think about the kind of story of this film? How does it set itself apart from the rest of them?
I think, first off, Captain America, the First Avenger is a period piece, and that allows, I mean, obviously, within recent years, Marvel have been getting a bit more creative with their films, but I think in terms of those earlier films in Phase 1 and Phase 2, it really sort of stands out as it is set in the 1940s. But it's all about, as Ibby was saying, in terms of Captain America's personality, in terms of Steve Rogers being a superhero and then also being really muscular. It's all about him. This story is very much about what it means to be a hero, in terms of what it means to be a good person and to go out of your way to help people, even in the face of danger and whatever, and then making huge sacrifices that affect you personally, such as not getting that last dance with Peggy, for the greater good. and it's great actually. You know, I often am quite harsh on the earlier MCU films, saying they all look the same and they're all a bit boring. But you know, when I go back and watch Captain America: First Avenger, I'm like, it's a good, tidy story. It's a good time.
Yeah, it's interesting that you do raise Peggy, because we've talked briefly about side characters in previous live streams, and mostly with sort of quite harsh criticism against the female counterparts, like companion characters to the hero, with Pepper Potts being reasonably good, and then Jane Foster and Betty Ross being not so good. So how do we feel about Peggy Carter as a character and also as a love interest / companion to Steve Rogers?
I think she's great.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I think that she's more than just a love interest, which is why she's so great, because she actually has a role to play, and she can fight by herself.
No, she actually feels like a character, whereas Jane, absolutely Betty Ross, and even a little bit of Pepper Potts, unfortunately, they all feel like, you know, they are Iron Man's love interest. They feel like they are the love interest, whereas Peggy Carter absolutely feels, and she goes on to have her own series, of course. But she absolutely feels like a standalone character within the story, which, you know, see more of that, please. But hey.
Yeah, absolutely. What about villains? Because the Phase 1 of the MCU has certainly the origin of what people are calling Marvel's villainous problem. So let's talk about Hydra, the Red Skull, and possibly even Arnim Zola, just on the side.
Sure.
What do we think, first of all, about the Red Skull? Very briefly.
I remember being very shook by that reveal when he peels off his face, because that was so dramatic back in the day.
Yeah. Like when things were still pretty reasonable, realistic, you know, not very comic booky.
I think I enjoyed this movie. I enjoy it a lot, but at the same time, especially now, like Nazis and like stuff has become very, very mainstream in a lot of movies. It's like your archetypal villain. So I don't know. I guess it seemed, I don't know. It's just different, and I liked it. But fine. Yeah.
It's the first time one of our heroes has had to face a villain who wasn't quite so complex, and I don't mean that in terms of how deep the character is, but in terms of there's no worries with punching the Red Skull, whereas you might not want to punch your own father figure in the case of Iron Man.
Yeah,
he's a straight up Nazi with a literal freaky looking red skull. Like, you know, it's a very easy villain narratively.
I think that makes sense for Captain America though, because Captain America is like meant to be like pure good.
Yeah.
Good guy, like that's the point of him. He has no moral issues, at least at this point. And the Red Skull is just the complete opposite of that, which is kind of the point of like the super soldier serum as well, because it enhances those qualities. And that's why I like it in this case, because they are complete opposites, but also the same in their like abilities.
What is interesting about this movie is how, you know, in the other movies we've all had like basically they're thrown against an opposite version of themselves. So we have Thor and Loki, who are both gods and brothers. We have Tony Stark and Obadiah, who is like the father figure, and then him against other sort of iron drones as well. And then with Hulk, we have him versus Thingy, the red
Abomination.
guy. Abomination. I don't like that word. Abomination. Fine. Which are all like basically, you know, they're set up against another version of themselves, whereas here we have very clearly like Captain America stands for good, Nazis bad, and there is not really any kind of moral crossover going on in this film.
I think always in movies with a protagonist and antagonist, you're going to have the conflict of binary opposites.
Yeah.
So for instance, as you were saying, like, you know, you've got that can either be done well or that can be done in a really boring way. As you were saying with Captain America, like I think what makes Red Skull work as a very 2D villain essentially is that he's visually quite different to Captain America.
Yeah.
I think the worst part about, again, I always come back to Black Panther in these live streams. I'm so sorry, but the bit I didn't like about Black Panther was that Killmonger at the end was so visually similar to Black Panther. The thing I hate about Abomination is he's just the Hulk, but slightly less green. You know, I think a lot of the time people will say, "Oh, the villain is an evil evil version of the main character," and though I absolutely understand that issue, that's kind of always going to be the case to some degree.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I quite like Red Skull as a villain, and I hope he comes back in Infinity War. So
you can't make Red Skull morally ambiguous. Like,
no, exactly.
He's a Nazi. Like, you can't do that with Nazis. You got to make them proper full-on evil. Otherwise, what's the point?
You run the risk in these sort of comic booky, cartoony situations like He-Man and Skeletor, right? You run the risk of making the villain unbelievable, just affably evil. And why are they the villain? Because they want to take over the world. But with Red Skull, it's far more believable that a man like that could exist, given the super soldier serum's existence.
And also Nazis.
Nazis existed. Specifically Johann Schmidt. Specifically this man obsessed with the gods, obsessed with achieving the power of the gods. And given a taste of that, he becomes this crazed, obsessive figure. And yet, you never lose any of the real fear of his power.
Completely.
Absolutely. He's got conviction.
Yeah. For me, he's just as scary after he does the reveal, but the reveal isn't like, I don't know, cheap in any way. Like, for me, it's not like, oh, he's suddenly inhuman. I mean, he is inhuman in a way, but, you know, that separates him further. But he's already gone very, very far off that path. So it's believable, but it doesn't ruin the suspense or anything for me.
Let's actually talk about that moment. So that moment within the movie is within a larger scene where Steve defies his orders and goes beyond the front lines to rescue the 107th?
Yeah.
A group of soldiers, including his best friend Bucky Barnes. And that's the first moment he really becomes Captain America. We see his sort of prototype suit, where he's been wearing the cloth one that he was wearing on the road as the, I don't know exactly what he called, the dancing monkey that he called it.
The dancing monkey, yeah.
And then he put the helmet on, he got that shield, and you can see Captain America coming together. But also, by defying orders and standing up for what he believes in, you truly see him become Captain America. And the Red Skull mirrors that as they're stood on a bridge looking across at each other. The bridge is literally burning.
Yeah.
The Red Skull takes off his mask and they both change from Johann Schmidt and Steve Rogers to the Red Skull in Captain America.
Yeah, that's really nice. I like that.
I just realised that they have the same story arc, just in completely opposite ways. Like, the Red Skull defies orders when he kills those dudes who are Hitler's men. And so does Steve. Yeah. And then they both defy orders, and then that's how they end up.
Yeah. And you can compare Bucky Barnes to Arnim Zola as their sort of sidekicks who rise to become more when they are forced to be separated.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of interesting parallels between those characters. What do we feel about the rest of the supporting cast? So specifically, we have General, what's his face, the very famous actor who's
the one from
and also the Howling Commandos.
Oh, the Howling Commandos.
Oh, Howling Commandos. The I don't know his name, but the Howling Commando from Asian descent, he's the principal in Spider-Man: Homecoming, same actor, and he's got the picture framed.
I believe his name might have been Jim.
Is it that from Fresno guy?
Yeah. There's a very interesting thing to mention there, actually. So yes, first of all, the actor then returned to play the principal in Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Yeah.
Had a picture on his desk of his grandfather.
Yeah.
Very, very funny. And I think whilst this movie doesn't do maybe super well, aside from Peggy, in presenting women. What it does do is present racial diversity particularly well, considering the time period.
Yeah,
because what a lot of war-based films do is just say, well, people were racist back then, therefore white people are the heroes. But if you actually look at records from the war, there was a great sense of camaraderie between everybody.
Yeah.
And I feel the Howling Commandos shows that very well, with Dum Dum Dugan being British. There's the black guy, this Asian guy, the French guy.
I would put a woman in the Howling Commandos because I've said this before, I don't like exceptionalism. So I do not like the idea that Peggy is like, aside from Natalie Dormer is in this movie.
No, I agree.
Like, I don't like the idea that she's like the only high up woman who's not doing secretary stuff. Like, because that's not.
Because then
really
it makes it like, oh, she's different. And like, no,
I don't like that in the Avengers with Black Widow, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, we'll go into that. But we're gonna destroy Joss Whedon. It's gonna be great.
But I feel like with Peggy Carter, at least it makes sense because it would have been very difficult at that time for a woman to get to that higher position. So it's like not quite so bad because it makes sense that Peggy's the only one to succeed because she is like exceptional.
And with that, I also think the way they did Peggy Carter's character was less so, oh, I'm a girl and I'm so different and I can do it too. Oh shit, she's a badass. Oh, and she's a woman too. Wow, impressive. It was kind of badass first, exceptional woman second, but yeah.
And at least in Agent Carter, they explored more women.
Yes, exactly. So. Yeah.
Yes.
With regards to the racial thing, there's the moment where the Howling Commandos, the rest of the troops, are broken out of prison, and one of them says, "What are we taking everybody now?" Looking at Jim the Asian man, and he says, "I'm from Fresno, Ace." Yeah, Jim the Asian. Man, I should have said man afterwards. Anyway, he did say then, "I'm from Fresno, Ace," at which point the movie makes it explicitly clear, but never harps on about it, that the war is fought through unity. Which ties into what Steve's iconic line was, "I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from."
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a through line through the whole of his franchise, and it's great.
Absolutely. Something I do think, whenever I think about this movie, is it may not be the best movie. Like it's like a 7 out of 10, right?
It's just a good movie. It's just a fine movie.
Solid movie.
But in terms of characterization, would not have a better introduction to Steve, to the Red Skull, to Bucky, to Peggy. Everyone is handled so well, and they are given moments and lines that stick with you. And Captain America's theme tune is the most inspiring thing.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I don't know, maybe this is just me being a Marvel nerd, but I feel the superhero movies, you have to give them another layer of judgment beyond just straight up film criticism. And I think that's what we're doing now, is just looking at them purely from a very loving standpoint and going, look, Steve Rogers is a huge part in the next few films, and he's presented wonderfully. Yeah. He's just great, you know? Very warming film, I think, in that sense.
Absolutely. Especially, as you said earlier, with it being a period piece, the colour palette used.
It's beautiful. It's gorgeous.
Lovely.
Actually.
And it's very heartwarming without without forgetting to include the harsh realities of the time period.
Yes.
Speaking of side characters, Howard Stark.
Oh yeah, I forgot about
Howard
him.
Stark.
I was going to say his name, but we started talking about Peggy instead.
That's fine.
Howard Stark's expression when Steve comes out of that cylinder thing is the most iconic thing in this whole franchise.
Dominic Cooper's acting as a whole is just really strong.
Yeah. Although what I find really sad is like it's kind of established that Tony has issues with his dad, and that he's like such a nice guy in this film, and we don't really see him change. I don't know. I guess that's criticism more at Iron Man than it is at this.
In Iron Man 2, there was that scene where Tony was looking through his dad's old stuff, and I feel it became quite clear that Tony's issue was being forgotten.
Yeah.
And that later on in his life, he learned how much his dad really did care for him.
Yeah.
And now we see Howard, where he's that playboy that Tony then becomes, but he's also a very obsessed man.
Yeah.
And we see at the end, when Steve goes in the ice, Howard gives up everything to try and find him and the Tesseract.
I'm interested in their choices for Howard, though, in that they've made him like a fairly decent guy in these movies, whereas my one memory from the comic is him hitting Tony in the face. So
yeah, comics do have a large issue with how do we make this person unlikable? Abuse. And that shorthand is something that I'm very glad has been left out of these movies.
Yes, me too.
I feel
Okay, I was going to say, in terms of setting up this movie, setting up Captain America, this lovely, lovable hero, I think the relationship that Steve has with Howard, I think really helps Tony's character in future movies as well. I feel that was one of the sort of the veins in Captain America Civil War, and particularly Avengers, was I think Tony felt like, the younger brother to Steve's friend. He felt like he was trying to live up to someone Steve already knew, and consequently, I feel a lot of the tension that the two have is, they're very close friends and they're very strong people as characters, and I think having Howard Stark in this film develop, kind of this camaraderie with Captain America really helps give not motivation necessarily, because Tony already has enough of that in terms of his conflict with Captain America, but it just sort of adds this extra texture to their relationship. And I don't know, I always think back to Howard Stark when I think of Tony Stark and Captain America. But
absolutely, yeah. Should we talk a bit about Bucky?
Go for it, wholeheartedly.
Cool. So James Buchanan Barnes, the best friend of Steve Rogers, who then suffers a great tragedy. Interesting to note, they aged him up for this movie. How do we feel about that?
Yes, they did. They did Batman and Robin.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in the original comic storyline, Steve was already Captain America. Steve was in the war. And then when he was camping out with this platoon, this 16-year-old, fairly exceptional kid walked into his tent, discovered his secret identity, and Cap basically just went, do you want to be my sidekick? Because at the time, Batman and Robin were so popular. Children wanted to feel like they too could fight alongside Captain America. And so that's where Bucky came in, but it always felt a little bit off, especially looking back at it. 16
charging into battle with these guns, and it's like 16, he's 8 years old, he's whatever.
And that's why in the comics, that's where the sort of tragedy of Bucky came in, because Cap felt like he couldn't protect him. And Cap felt that his greatest downfall was Bucky. Whereas in this film, the dynamic is sort of reversed.
How so reversed?
Reverse, not so much in Cap feeling the other way, but in that Bucky is certainly, if not the older one, he's the bigger one at the beginning. He's the one who protects Steve.
Right. Because I do think that they kept those themes of him feeling like he'd failed in terms of just when Bucky dies, which has a lot of parallels with how Loki dies actually in the first one.
Yes, definitely.
Dies. Sorry.
Yes. Also, there is something we have to consider when talking about these movies is the Winter Soldier cannot exist to us right now. We have to talk about Bucky as if he dies.
Okay. Bucky dies in this movie.
Yeah.
I thought it was really powerful because, also they build him up to be a very likable character all the way through, and show how much he means to Steve, before and after his transformation. So I think it's still hits pretty hard, even though he's not necessarily the one he's supposed the Cap's supposed to be protecting. Though you could say that their roles switch when Cap becomes the super soldier. The there's like that moment when Peggy comes into the bar and like Steve and Bucky are stood next to each other, and she just does not take her eyes off Steve and doesn't look at Bucky. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm you," and like with like the whole protecting each other thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I agree.
There's especially that beautiful moment on the train shortly before Bucky's death where he picks up the shield.
Yes.
You want to talk a bit about that?
Oh, we can do. I was going to talk about the death. Do you want
specifically-
to talk shield first or death first?
Well, we can go in how Bucky has his moment before he dies.
Sure.
And what picking up the shield means, because I think the greatest strength of the Captain America movies, and this one in particular, is the symbolism and making the legacy important. And that's something I feel is quite strong throughout the MCU, whereas in other superhero movies, such as the X-Men and even DC, to some extent, the symbols don't have as much meaning. Like, everyone knows the Superman S and the Batarang and the Batmobile, but if we look at, say, in the X-Men, the Blackbird or Cyclops' visor, or to
They're
a
very
far
personal.
lesser extent. Yeah, exactly.
X-Men is about LGBT sort of individuality type stuff, whereas Captain America, and again, they try to do it in Dark Knight, it's about inspiring people. And I think it's important to draw attention here to the word we keep saying, or the name we keep saying. Steve Rogers is Captain America.
Yes.
He is the country. He is an entire. Obviously, America is meant to be like, freedom for everyone, but
talking about
I wonder how
America
that's
as
like,
it was romanticized during the war.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But, Captain America is Mr. Symbolism #1, I think, and I think it'd be quite difficult to dispute that. And Bucky Barnes, though he was a close friend of Steve Rogers, that was more, to me at least, symbolizing the American army, the American people picking up the shield and becoming Captain America. And I think actually there is a shot. Is it at the end of the film? Where there's a kid with a thin lid. Yeah, that's again, that's someone else picking up the shield. That is America being Captain America.
The legacy of Captain America is something that goes through the rest of these films. Like you see it in Avengers with Coulson. Although I have seen some people being like, "Oh yeah, the kid at the end of first Avenger is Coulson." Like, no, but that's a beautiful dream you have over there.
So it's an interesting parallel to, and I don't want to linger on this, but The Last Jedi, with the child at the end.
Yeah.
The Force-sensitive child. And I do like that in films that deal with legacy, in showing that it's for the kids, not only in the real world, not only in that world, but also in our world.
The real world as well.
Yeah. This happens at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's in Iron Man 2.
Iron Man 2 with the kid who is now apparently Peter Parker.
Oh, yeah, it's Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Peter Parker, it's canon.
That one's believable, actually.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's something that's very strong, because I've talked a lot in previous live streams about the legacy and the cultural impact of these superheroes. And I think none, and deservedly so, no superhero in Marvel's, in the MCU prior to Spider-Man had a bigger cultural impact than Captain America.
Yeah.
His everything, you can, like, as much as Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man is brilliant, I'd say it's more Tony Stark that people are attached to. No one is going out there saying, I want an Iron Man suit. They're saying,
I would like an Iron Man suit.
Yes,
I
but
would
not
take that.
because you want to be Iron Man.
They're saying I want to
like
listen
the
to
technology.
AC/DC. They're saying I want to be like a cool guy with a nice little bit of facial hair. That's what they're saying.
Isn't that what we all dream about?
But there are people out there going, I would like to buy, and they've made replicas. You can buy a Captain America shield.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
get into
Vibranium is a fictional metal, so I question your use of the word replica.
Yeah. However, yeah. I think that Steve's icon is very strong in this movie, and it carries through to the rest of them, especially as we see in the Avengers.
Yes.
So just sort of giving final thoughts on the first Avenger on its own. I think it's a very solid movie that has perfect character and perfect tone. And as the one that immediately preceded the Avengers, it did very well to set up the storyline of the MCU continuing.
Yeah.
Emma, any thoughts on that? Oh, Ibby?
Are we going to rate it in any way?
If you want to.
I just want to say that, like, for me, watching this movie, like, I saw it after I saw Avengers, but
So did I.
yeah, but for me, this movie is not as good without the other two films and without the films that come after it. Like, watching it back, it's after, like, I've seen the other films, it means a lot more to me. Whereas, like, when I watched it the first time, I was like, meh, whatever. It's a good movie, but not bad.
Ooh.
Not bad.
Okay, Emma.
I disagree. I think this is one of the only Marvel films that I would be, especially the earlier ones, that I would be totally happy to watch just as its own movie, because it feels
I think
so
it's good
separate
as
to
a
the rest of the
standalone.
MCU. Yeah.
But I enjoyed it more because of what comes after.
That's
looking back.
James, what do you think? First Avenger in retrospect, or just First Avenger? Especially compared to, like, Iron Man in retrospect, etc.
Well, I think obviously when I look back on it now that I've had so much more history with Captain America, seeing the first time he was in, it's like looking through an old photo album, and it's, you know, it's lovely, it's great fun. But in terms of as a movie by itself, as a standalone, I refuse to go back and watch Thor. I refuse to watch Iron Man 2. Obviously Thor Dark World as well, but, like, you know, Hulk's not on the list. Even Iron Man, you know, Iron Man and Captain America 1 are the only movies that I will actively, happily go back and watch and sit down and watch again. And it's because they are solid, they are standalone, they are character based, and they have a theme, they have some kind of feel to them. I feel Iron Man's theme kind of carried across and leaked into a lot of the other films since then. But Captain America, I think, absolutely being set in 1940, being a period piece, absolutely benefited from that, and felt more complete as a unit. As a film, it's, you know, it's fine. It's not exactly a brilliant film, but I can hardly say it's a bad film. But I love it. You know, it's a good time.
For me, it's just very average of, like, war films and Nazis and dealing with that. It's like they don't really do anything new in this movie that hasn't been done 1,000 times, apart from that there's superheroes. But
Emma,
that's quite a lot of criticisms.
Yeah. What's been happening in the chat?
Apparently in America, they just call it Captain America. They don't call it the First Avenger. And they really struggle to get that subtitle going.
Why do we have the subtitle? Because none of the other first set of films have a subtitle.
Enough, I can tell you that in some countries, especially countries that America wants the money from but has a hard time selling to, they just called it the First Avenger.
Of course they did. That's funny.
I think it's because Avengers followed straight after and they were trying to pick it up.
That's interesting. That's really quite interesting. Anything else? Not really.
Captain America is a really nice body. There we are.
Oh,
that's true.
Big boobs.
Pretty hot cast in this, I'm just going to say it now.
Yeah.
We have Peggy Carter is so attractive. Right, moving on.
Natalie Dormer is in this film, and
Natalie Dormer is in this film.
Amazing.
Solidly in this film.
Yes. You can't
when
say
she
she
kisses
isn't.
Steve, that is an iconic moment.
Oh, but then afterwards when Peggy, like, shoots the shield because she's mad.
That whole
That's
scene.
my favourite scene.
Oh my god.
It's like,
what a scene.
Oh, also, I do like the evolution of the shield throughout this, because not only do we see the evolution of Cap's costume, we have his triangular shield, well, whatever.
Shield.
We
shield.
do.
Yeah.
We
It's
do.
just like a
The
knight
shield-shaped
shield.
Yeah,
shield
then
shield.
the plain shield, then the iconic shield.
Well, actually, it starts off as a car door and then a
Oh
a
yeah,
bin
there's also
lid,
the car
then a
door.
car door, then the shield, then the round shield.
You're entirely right.
I'm just reading the chat, and there's some mixed reactions on that
Okay.
scene with Natalie Dormer. There is
Give
some
us some
hatred and some
thoughts.
love.
Perfect.
Although I don't really like Natalie Dormer's character in this, I'm just going to say that now. I don't think her character is like great.
I mean, she's only there to like.
Yeah, she's just there as like
To
a
make
side
Peggy
love
mad.
interest. Also,
But also
shooting
to
at
represent
Steve is
the
like
way
kind
that-
of problematic, but that scene is really good.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They show, because I think that scene does really well to show the difference between Steve Rogers and Captain America at that point. Captain America, the character that the nation loves, and Steve Rogers,
Who's just like,
the
I don't
man
know.
who doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think it does show it really well there.
Listen, Peggy shooting a gun is feminism. This is the 1940s.
Oh
We
yeah.
have a
Yeah,
comment.
that's Feminism
Okay.
101.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with Jules. Like, she could have actually injured him, and like,
No, she couldn't. She's Peggy Carter. She knows what she's doing.
She's a
I'm
genius.
gonna use
Okay,
any
what
criticism
happens to
of
the
Peggy
bullets when they
Carter.
bang off the shield? Then, huh? They could have injured someone else.
It's
Vibranium.
vibranium, it absorbs the blast, it doesn't bounce off, it just
Oh
drops
right,
to the floor.
fine.
Yeah.
That's me not knowing.
Comic book
I
bro.
don't believe in comic books. Sorry.
They would be right at his toes. We do have a comment from Jamie Does Things, which says the first Avenger was the movie that started getting me into the MCU properly during my year abroad. So even though it's not my favorite, it has a place in my heart. So
Yeah,
I
no,
think
me
that's
too,
really quite
actually.
interesting.
Me too. I think I missed Thor when it came out, but I'd seen Iron
It's
Man
the
and
best.
Captain America, and I was like, I'm getting invested in this.
Yeah, my first movie was Avengers, and then this one, then Captain America.
That's cool.
So that's why it's important to me.
So what about the Avengers?
Okay.
Yeah.
We're ready.
Now we're in 2020.
Oh, here we are.
Should we start off
4
with our personal
years.
feelings on this one? Because
Yeah. 4
I
years
fucking
since
love this
Iron
movie.
Man. 4 years since this all began. And at this point, the general public knows what's going on.
I
Enough
didn't.
nerds have been out there. You still went to see the Avengers.
I did.
No, I didn't. I watched on DVD afterwards.
That's fine. Ibby,
Why
did you go to see the Avengers?
Okay, so basically, I mean, we were just like at school, and my friend was like, "Oh yeah, it's a superhero film. Do you want to see it?" And I was like, "Yeah, all right." And it was like the first time we'd gone to the cinema without parental supervision. So we went and we saw it in like IMAX or something, and it was really good. And we all came out being like, "I want to be this Avenger. I want to be this one." Obviously, I was Loki, just saying. And it like basically impacted our friendship group for like the whole year afterwards. We saw all the other films together. And like, you know, it just means a lot to me as a movie. I don't know, it came at like an important time in my life. And when it came out on DVD, I watched it basically every day for like 2 weeks, and then and I've seen it at least every month since then.
God damn. That's intense.
I could like, if you put this movie on, I will just quote with everyone.
Yeah, to be honest, I was like that earlier. I've seen it so many times.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So Emma, what was your first experience seeing the Avengers?
I was with my family. We were eating dinner in front of the TV and watching a film. So we were looking for something that everyone would enjoy. So we went for something everyone but my mum would enjoy and watched the Avengers because I liked kind of actiony movies, and so did my dad and brother. And I don't know if my dad and brother had actually seen it before. I don't know. And I loved it. And then I watched it loads of other times because I enjoyed it so much. And then I went back and watched all the others too.
Cool.
So.
James?
As I said, I was an Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes kid. So seeing this movie, well, again, I'd seen Iron Man, seen Hulk. I think, had I seen Thor? I must have. But, you know, I'd seen Captain America and said, wait, is this really happening? And I went to go see it with my my stepdad and my mum and my 2 younger brothers. On it must have been opening weekend. It wasn't opening night. I was a young kid, but you know, opening weekend. And I remember the one circle scene with the Avengers theme playing, and you do that turning shot of all of them circled up at the end. I think I I definitely came close to crying at that point because it was magical. It was incredible to see something like this done before. And I think at the end of the day, when I look back on the Avengers, I see a film that is like fine, like story-wise, it's kind of a bit beat by beat, and you're like, oh, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then it's the end, and then it's all good, very formulaic. But it's everything that movie symbolizes. It's everything that movie did at the time that makes it just a classic, just an incredible classic. Like, you know, when you watch the Harry Potter movies at Christmas, Avengers when it's on TV, like, you just have to watch it.
Yeah.
So, oh, beautiful.
Absolutely.
That's my thoughts.
So, similar situation to you there, James. I'd seen all the movies except the Hulk because marketing was shoddy.
Yeah.
And then,
It's for the best.
Yeah. And then certainly from my perspective, this was the point where all my friends started to pay attention. This was the point where even my mum knew what was going on. This was the point where it felt real. The Avengers weren't just a pipe dream. The Avengers weren't just something I would read about in my bedroom. The Avengers were equal to Spider-Man.
Yeah. This movie broke my brain.
Yeah.
Like, seeing so many superheroes together, I was just like, oh my god, what is happening? And like every scene like hits like reasonably well. Like, there's not really for me any, I mean, there's a couple of moments that fall a bit flat, a couple of jokes that aren't that great, but at the same time, like at the time, it was great. It was hilarious, and everyone in the cinema that I was in was laughing along for it, and I was just like, what is this movie? This is not like any action movie I'd ever seen. And it was like just insane.
And it isn't. People kind of criticize it for being a bit formulaic. Hell, I do the same. However, that's because it had to be. It had to be. Here's what you know. Now we're going to blow it all out of the water with something you've never seen before.
I mean, I knew nothing, and this movie still blew my brain out.
Was it formulaic then, or did it like enforce the formula?
People still talk about how its 5-act structure is a bit weird, but in terms of like hitting action beats, it's fairly standard.
Right, but I think that was like the start of, like, there hadn't been that many superhero movies then. Yeah, and at this point, we're kind of tired of the generic superhero movie, villain arrives, all that stuff. Yeah, and like. So we're changing. So like they're changing it now to make it more interesting for people. But back then, I think it was fairly new. Like it
was the way I see it, at least. It was the nail in the coffin. It was. You know, you had formulaic this, that, the other. You had what, and then you had Avengers, which was the superhero movie. It was the one to go to. It went bang, 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 with all the the beats, and I think it's a very clean and chiseled movie, which leads it to be a little bit formulaic, but a very tight, strong working ship of a movie. But you've done it now. That's perfected. Yeah. You've done the Avengers. You've done your superhero movies. Yeah. Now you're going to give us Thor: The Dark World and like.
Oh, don't.
And it's
the next one was Iron Man.
Can you move on, please? Can you give us something different?
Yeah.
I think it's also made to be an introduction to the MCU. Like, obviously, it is an introduction to the universe, but also, like, I think they meant for people to watch this first.
Yeah.
They missed the other ones. Then.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like I understood everything that happened in this movie.
Yeah. There's a lot of exposition and a lot of, like, explaining what the characters' roles are. And I think because it's so clear, it's really easy for, like, a beginner to get it. Because comics and like superheroes can get really confusing and complex, and people now are trying to get into it, and they're like, "What's all this infinity?"
How many times have you seen people say, "Where do I begin with the MCU?"
Yeah,
we should do a live stream about where to begin.
It's the
comic books as well. Yeah,
that's where.
100%.
Well, in terms of comic books, we can definitely do that.
We can all fight about that.
In terms of superhero films, there is nowhere to begin except the Avengers.
Yeah,
wholeheartedly.
For me, this movie is both a beginning and an ending. Like that end scene where we zoom out from that tower, that could be the conclusion of like an entire series of movies.
You could never make a superhero movie again.
Movies ever again. And then, but it's like also a beginning as well, and that's why for me it was such like a powerful ending. This is the movie that got me into like fan culture, which we might go into in a little bit. But like the Tumblr community was very active at this point.
Yeah.
And like, you know, there was a lot of fan fiction being written, a lot of stuff being done with these characters, and it was really interesting. So
Definitely.
yeah, it's a starting and an ending. I like it.
Yeah. So let's do this simple rundown of characters. I say let's begin with Iron Man. How has he changed since his own movies?
So it's a good, bold question that I was not expecting.
What makes him stand out in the Avengers compared to Iron Man 1 and 2?
He's willing to take a sacrifice at the end, and I think it's really interesting. I see Tony Stark as this very throughout in the MCU movies. He can't decide whether he is a lone wolf or the team player. I don't know if I'm hesitant to say leader. I think that leader aspect of him is him being the lone wolf kind of character, just being a strong, bold, whatever. But he has consistently shown throughout the MCU, and especially in this movie, that he puts on this show for everyone that he's the Iron Man. He is the iron suit of armor, and then you take that away, and on the inside, you know, he is willing to sacrifice everything if it means getting a missile out of the city. He is willing to sacrifice everything to make a robot to protect the world. He will do anything for his friends. He will put parachutes into little boys' Spider-Man pajamas. Like, it's Tony Stark, honestly, is he really is one of my he is my favorite character in the MCU. And I think he gets a lot of bad rep for making Ultron, and he's just trying his best, and he's got anxiety disorders, and he's a good guy, okay? Leave him alone. Yeah,
So
this movie absolutely, for me, defines the character of Tony Stark, because we see such a sharp... We see both sides of his personality spot on at their peak.
You touched upon his leadership qualities, and something at the time, and still now, but specifically at the time, Captain America was my guy. I'd been reading comic books for 5 years at that point. It had been Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor comics, and I started off liking Iron Man the best. But by the time Avengers came out, and I'd seen the first Avenger, and I fully kind of clicked with Steve, he was my guy.
Sure.
And so I was a little bit upset at the time when this movie didn't present Steve in the way I wanted it to.
Right.
Whereas, essentially, I was upset that he wasn't the leader, even though that's what the script clearly wanted him to be. If you look at marketing for this movie, if you look at the public reception, Tony Stark is the leader.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. They've addressed that. I think either Joss Whedon or Kevin Feige went away and said Captain America was the main character in that film, but I always considered Tony Stark as the leader of the Avengers, but he's so not. He's so not.
There's a main character in this movie.
Huh?
There's a main character in this movie.
No, there absolutely is. No, there's totally a main character in this
for
movie.
me, that was Tony.
Yeah.
Tony and Steve are like my lead-ins.
If you look at the deleted scenes from this movie, most of them are about Steve, and most of them force you to follow his character as everyone else moves around him.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that even here we can see Tony and Steve like vying to be the leader. Like you see moments where Steve looks like the leader, moments where Tony looks like the leader, and that I know that's kind of jarring to us. Like that's what we're talking about is weird, but that's kind of the point, because then
that
we
was
get
the
Civil
point.
War, and then they're fully clashing, and like they're supposed to kind of be like a leader lancer switching over situation. Where they
it's the scene where they're saving the helicarrier with and Captain America's pulling the lever to get Tony out. That for me was, to me they're the mum and dad. They're the dad and the dad. They're the mum and the mum. They're the parental figures of the they're both the leader. They're both just as at least they're the leaders of the MCU. Captain America is the leader of the Avengers, but those two they began the universe and they're going to end the universe together. Actually, that's an interesting point. Who is the first Avenger? Is it Captain America, as he was in 1940, or is it Tony Stark because he was the first movie?
I think they are both for those reasons, and I think that's very intentional.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I think that's the reason
I'm
they
glad
did
it doesn't
Captain
America.
It's similar to how if you ask a nerd who the first superhero is, they can't quite tell you.
Yeah.
He did that yesterday.
There's a lot going on there, and the MCU really plays into that, in that they both feel like they're the first. And they've both been treated like the first. So let's actually talk about Thor a bit. How does Thor behave in this movie, and what's his role?
I think it works quite nicely because you have Captain America and Tony Stark as the leading the leaders of the Avengers, the leaders of Earth, and then you have Thor come down and he sort of brings Loki with him, or other way around. Loki comes down and he brings Thor with him consequently. But I feel because Thor has such a strong connection to the villain, he serves as a lot of exposition saying, Loki is my brother, he's adopted. But I feel that allows for Thor to be as equal of a main character, because he's the villain of the movie, but he's not the villain, he's the superhero counterpart to the villain. So as a trio, you've got Captain America and Iron Man being the Civil War duo, being the Earth's mightiest heroes, and then Thor just sort of joining in as an Avenger, making it Avengers Assemble. And I think that's very clever, actually, to do it that way.
What I really like about this is that we do see how much Thor has grown, finally, since we don't really see that at any other point in earlier movies, as we roasted that movie to shreds last week. But we see Thor, he comes down and he doesn't immediately try and take charge in a kind of way that he dominates the team. He's like willing to listen to other people and what they have to say. He actually has the second lowest screen time in this movie out of the main 7 characters. And I think that's like, we finally see how much he has changed as a character. And like, for me, that works. Yeah, I wouldn't like to see him, Captain America and Iron Man, kind of having like a free... I mean, they are the free leaders of the MCU, but if there was a free dynamic of them all vying for leadership of a team with 6 people on it, that's not going to work.
So there's something interesting to bring up here, and that's the concept of the superhero trinity. It's always been a thing in DC, so much so they even have a book called Trinity. And that is the idea that Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman are their main heroes.
They are Thor the dirty in these movies. boy, they deserved better.
The Superman is Earth's hero, Batman is just the coolest guy, and Wonder Woman is simultaneously the girl and also, because that's a trope, simultaneously the girl and also the sort of the connection to the old.
In the Captain America is. Yeah,
in the Captain America is. And so Marvel has always tried to push the idea that Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor are their trinity. They're always the most important in the stories. Anytime there's a world-ending event, those 3 come together and everyone rallies behind them. However, what's interesting to note is that the general audience has never really accepted that. The X-Men, Spider-Man, Hulk, and Wolverine as separate from the X-Men were always more popular, even the Fantastic Four. So it's interesting to see this movie really show Cap, Steve, and Thor as Cap, Tony, and Thor as this trinity.
I actually used to refuse Thor as the Trinity. I was like, the real Trinity are Captain America, Iron Man, and the Hulk. And since then I realised that. Shut up, James. But it was really interesting to see them take essentially lesser known characters and make them the pillars not only of the universe but the Avengers. And they did a good bloody job. So good on them.
I think it's interesting how those 3 are the ones like anchored into like being mad at Loki, like because the other characters don't have so much of a connection, at least before he arrives. But like Thor obviously is his brother. For Tony, like it's the fact that the Tesseract used to be with his father, but I don't know. But also because it's his tower that he uses, and then obviously Cap's got the Tesseract, which was a big part of his movie. So like they all have a connection to Loki.
Is interesting. I want to add on to that is remember what Steve died for. Steve died to protect the world from the Tesseract. Sorry. In his mind, that's his sacrifice. His bigger sacrifice was to stop the power falling into evil hands. He wakes up, and what happens? It's still going. He can't. He died for this, and it's still like there's nothing that can stop Steve's life from going on. And I think that's a really powerful character motivation.
But I don't think they explored enough, to be fair.
Yeah,
like there's a great scene where he's like, "You should have left it in the water." But apart from that, like,
I think that the boxing scene in the beginning, where it explores elements of his PTSD, and also just it's a great introduction to his powers, his motivation, and the old way he does things. The boxing scene is one of my favorite scenes of this movie.
That is a good scene. There's some good shots in that scene.
And he's got a nice ass.
I also think they do a great job of introducing the Hulk in this movie, because I think a lot of people hadn't seen The Incredible Hulk. So, and also it's a different actor, but they do a really, really great job of like showing who this Bruce Banner is. And he's just really likable.
When he's like, "Sorry, I just wanted to see what you do. My heart." It was amazing.
And like there's the bit at the start where like we first see him, and he's like with the little girl who's taking him to meet Natasha, and he just stops her before the car goes across, and like it's the tiniest little detail, but like it just shows like how considerate this guy is and how he's so different to the Hulk. And I think that's really interesting.
He also, interestingly enough, looks away from the car because it's an army jeep. He doesn't want anyone to see him. So it's this dual motivation there.
He's very different to the other heroes who, like, especially Tony Stark, which is why the Science Bros dynamic is so interesting. It's like they are complete opposites in how they approach kind of fame and like generally just being well known. Like Bruce he doesn't want people to see him, even as Bruce Banner. He doesn't want people to see the Hulk either.
No, that was actually one of my favorite parts from I honestly, I love Mark Ruffalo and I love his portrayal of Bruce Banner and the Hulk. And one of my favorite moments is when Tony Stark is actually being really sincere and saying, like, obviously, I love the Hulk. You're really cool. You smash the shit out of stuff, but I genuinely love your work. And you sort of see something in Bruce Banner that you kind of, I just love it. I
am convinced it's his connection with Tony and that like scene where Tony like accepts him that makes him come back at the end.
Yes. Oh, completely.
What I do like is how they show Bruce as a genius, but also distinct from Tony. Because there's easy to fall into, especially in the comics, where James, you'll probably have heard of this, the top 10 smartest people in the world.
Yes.
They're all fighting to be the top smartest, and like Black Panther, Peter Parker, Reed Richards, etc. And it just equates intelligence. It just equates intelligence.
All that good stuff.
Whereas I like the idea that Tony Stark is the greatest engineer in the world, Bruce Banner is the greatest biologist, Reed Richards is a theoretical physicist, etc.
I also like that they're different types of smart. So like Tony's like, I learned all this in the night, and Bruce is like, I've spent my life learning about gamma radiation, and it's like they're very different, and it suits their personalities. In that Tony's like the top of the class who like just doesn't try for a test, whereas Bruce is like constantly working because he wants to get that A, and I just really like that comparison.
But they don't suggest either of them are better or worse than the other, and that's nice.
I also the reason I brought this up was in the scene where Natasha is essentially inviting Bruce to the Avengers. He's always in control. He knows he's being manipulated, and he goes with it intentionally. For example, when it's revealed that she has the building surrounded, and he says, "Oh, thought we were alone." He never thought he was alone, and he always has an escape route. He always has just things. He knows people.
I also think that like that scene is a better introduction to like the later Natasha and Bruce like romance than any of the scenes in Age of Ultron. Like I think that you can see how they kind of understand each other at a point, like the bit where she like points the gun at him and then he's like, and then she realizes that he's not going to do anything and then she tells him to stand down, and you can just see like a bit of like these characters are starting to understand where each other are coming from, and I just like that.
Especially, I think it's very good with I can't remember exactly what her line is, but he says, "Yeah, well, I don't always get what I want," as he's looking at a baby's crib.
Oh, so sweet.
Yeah.
And that just sets up their dynamic so well.
And also it shows the fear in her eyes when she pulls the gun, then later plays well into the film where where Bruce hulks out and she's running through the helicarrier. Because she is deathly afraid of the Hulk because he is the only thing that she can't control.
Also, like I like that I feel like she can see the difference between Bruce and the Hulk, which a lot of other characters don't. Like, and like she trusts Bruce Banner, but she's still wary of them.
Because she knows the difference between being a human and being a monster.
Yeah.
It's a very personal thing to her.
Yeah.
I also, if we're going to talk about how the way characters interact with Bruce, there's the perfect line where they're on the helicarrier, both Bruce and Steve, and Natasha's being like, "Yeah, you want to get inside?" That little bit, and then Bruce approaches Steve. Steve says, "I hear you know about gamma radiation." Bruce says, "Is that the only word about me?" And what does Steve say?
It's the only one I care about.
And
I can quote this entire movie, sorry.
Right? It's absolutely perfect character interaction, and it also progresses the plot.
Yeah.
And I think that Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner is absolutely brilliant.
That scene with the two of them just looking like over in bafflement, and they're both unhappy for a different reason. Like Steve is like, "What the fuck is happening?" And he's just like, "Oh, I could just Hulk out. This is so stressful." Yeah. And it's like a completely new environment to both of them, and that's really nice.
Should we talk about the helicarrier? Because I feel we take it for granted now.
The helicarriers.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
I think it's cool.
I love it. I loved it when they turned invisible. That was great.
Unfortunately, James has dropped out because his Wi-Fi. So we may get some comments from him later on. But so the helicarrier is as iconic in the comics as the Batmobile.
Yeah.
And I feel that this movie really, really introduced it well. It gave it enough gravitas. It gave it enough. It became a home for the Avengers and for S.H.I.E.L.D. And it was so easy to take the idea of a helicarrier that flies and turns invisible into this weird thing that no one cared about. And yet, in The Winter Soldier, when 3 of them came crashing down, and in Avengers Age of Ultron, where one of them returned, it gave it enough impact.
Yeah. What I like in this movie is that the helicarrier is a good place for like lots of different things to be happening at once. So like, because it's just a good stage. So like you've got where the cage where Loki is, which is the bit with Coulson and Thor and stuff. And then you've got Hulk hulking out on one of the levels and like smashing things up, which is extra scary because they're in the sky. And then you have with the spinny thing, what do you call it?
Rotors.
Yeah, with the rotors and Cap and Tony working together. And you've got like these 3 or 4 scenes that are like cutting between them, and it just like has quite good tension and it's just quite exciting.
I really like the design as well. Like it reminds me very much of because this was the only experience I'd had of something like this, of the Valiant in Doctor Who.
Oh, absolutely. Master.
Yeah. And it's just really nice. I like the whole design. I love that scene where they do the panels. Also, can we talk about how like well this is shot? Like it's fine, it's decent, as opposed to Thor, where there's those angles that upset me on a deep level.
I noticed that we watched this movie earlier, and literally there were so many of those angles just on Thor, though. So it was like they're trying to make it a thing.
It's not a thing.
I was like, why is there so many wonky angles on Thor?
But in the fight scenes, there's like the tracking shots are just wonderful, and I know most of that is like CGI. But that bit where Steve and Tony also do the move, which is like iconic. I don't know what it's called.
So
It's
during
iconic.
the one shot where they're all flying around, we follow them. Tony lands, and Steve's like being overwhelmed. So Tony shoots lasers at Steve for him to rebound off his shield to get everyone.
It's iconic.
Iconic and brilliant. However, what Tony could have done is faced the other way and just shot them. Steve was absolutely not involved in any of that. But it's a beautiful
Steve loved
scene.
it. It's a symbol of their unity.
Yeah, like it's a
bringing the team
brilliant.
together.
Makes no sense. But it's brilliant.
Most things make no sense. It's fine.
Yeah. So should we talk about the fighting? Let's talk about
Do we want to just quickly talk about the other characters? Just
Okay.
before we get completely sidetracked. Sorry.
Thank you for keeping me on board. So let's move on. We've already talked a bit about Natasha. Let's talk more about Natasha.
Fine. She's fine in this movie. Like, I was sold on her. It was fine. Like, as an introduction, because I hadn't seen Iron Man 2, so it was fine. I enjoyed her as a character. But
I really like the first scene where we're introduced to her with the Russian and the... I remember watching that and being like, oh, here's the like attractive female character who's just there to be pretty. But then there's the moment where she gets on the phone to Coulson or whoever, and she's like, oh, I'm in an interrogation, and you think that she's trapped and she's not. I like her. I think she's very cool.
Movie. Yeah. Although, costume-wise, if I had $1 for every time there is unnecessary boob, I could buy Marvel and redo their costume department myself. Okay? I am so done with this shit, and it's still happening, and it upsets me.
As a Black Widow costume, like, let's just agree that the Black Widow costume is dumb.
Why isn't it zipped up? That's so dangerous.
Right?
But surely you're going to zip more down.
At least in this she has short hair. Because it annoys me in the other movies when she's got long hair just like down. Like, you would tie that up. Come on.
There is a behind the scenes bit from, I think it's Iron Man 2, where she had it in a tight ponytail.
There is the implication with the new Avengers footage, since she's been on the run, that she's naturally blonde.
I like that. I was talking briefly about that. We'll talk more about that at a later point.
We'll talk more about that, yeah.
Yeah, it's the idea that the reason she's had so many haircuts is that it's just something she does. And I think that adds a nice little bit of character that makes no sense for an action hero, but in a world where a guy from the 1940s wears a spangly red, white, and blue outfit, it adds a bit of uniqueness to her. It makes her not Maria Hill.
But at the same time, I feel like it shows an inconsistency in her character that you see throughout. Like, I'm still not in, like, you could make all these women that she is completely different characters and you wouldn't fucking notice. Like, aside from Age of Ultron, like, for me, Iron Man 2, Avengers could be a different person.
I think Iron Man 2 didn't necessarily introduce her clearly enough, but I think after Avengers, I think they got her character then, because like they have the great scene with her and Loki, which is like, I've got red up my ledger. Like, I feel like that's when they realized who she was and who they wanted her to be. And so they had her character quite consistently from then on, but she just kept changing her hair. I don't understand why.
Yeah.
Like, I get the Spy, but if she was a Spy, she'd change her hair colour as well.
The real reason is action figures. And
change her costume. Give her a more interesting costume.
That's the problem.
Why doesn't she have the spider bite things?
Right, so this is what I wanted to tap into.
Waiting for Tony to design them.
Even as a Black Widow costume, which you just have to sort of accept is dumb and sexist and weird, it's not even a good Black Widow costume. It's a simple shield outfit with an hourglass on the belt.
I think what's really iconic about Black Widow, though, is her hair. So, like, you can recognize her by the red hair and the black suit, and that's all you really need, because she's just a very simple character, and that's what's good about her. But I don't get why they just had to keep changing her hairstyles, because it doesn't make any sense with, like, the Spy thing, because then she changed her hair color, and, like, it's just inconsistent. Like, I just don't see the point. Like, it's not that it's, like, that abrasive, but, like, she might as well have just stuck with one. And I think they had a good one in the first Avengers.
Yeah, I like her look in the first Avengers. Although I would have liked her with the fringe as well, but whatever. It's a nice length. I like it. Yeah, I mean, we're probably not going to talk about hair and makeup for anyone else, are we? But I'll just say now, Thor's wig in this is hideous.
It's worse than Thor. Like, what I did notice about in this one, at least he looks a bit bedraggled. In the first one, he's just Goldilocks.
I know. I'm so glad they finally put like dark roots in it as in Thor 2, because otherwise it just looks so stupid with Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
okay, continued. Sorry,
yeah,
just
so
clocking that we are being a bit.
Costume. Even Hawkeye had his purple.
Not enough of it. Give Hawkeye more purple.
What I thought was more iconic about Hawkeye's costume was the armbands.
Yeah.
I noticed that when I was watching it today. Like, I think that's quite a good.
So something I've always been mad about is the underutilization of the Widow motif and the spider bite.
Yeah.
Or the Widow's bite. She's always had the bracelets. She's always had the belt buckle. But the movies can never decide what her weapon is. And in superhero movies, it is very important to pick something and stick to it. Hawkeye has a bow. It can change movie to movie, but he's always got a bow. Daredevil has his weird acrobatic sticks with a string on them. What does Black Widow have?
Okay, this is what confuses me about this movie. Is she has these tiny guns. What the fuck are those for? And also, in the final, you know, in the credits, the pretty one, nice one, they show the Widow's bite. So she doesn't use it.
The bracelets. Remember when they were suiting up and she had that electricity taser?
And she didn't use it.
Yeah, she used it once in a throwaway shot. The Widow's bite is essentially just these bracelets that they're as multi-purpose as Hawkeye's arrows. So you know how Hawkeye can pick the arrowhead?
Yeah.
She can pick what weapon she wants from her wrist bracelets. So she has like tasers, which are the main one. She can technically shoot bullets like smoke bombs. It's an entire bat belt, but on her wrists.
And why doesn't she use it?
That's my biggest problem. They never draw attention to the most defining character trait of her action self. And then they decided, go on.
There's fucking aliens dropping from the sky. Put those guns away and go and like electrocute them.
And what didn't make sense to me was that the police were trying to use guns and nothing was happening. Like that, it wasn't working. But she can shoot people
with the same gun. It's not even a good gun.
Like she's not just got a better gun than them. She's not got like magic guns.
So we see in future movies she develops other things.
That's a grappling hook in Winter Soldier. That's nice. I appreciate that.
In future movies, they've essentially gone with the idea that she has batons, like Nightwing or Daredevil.
I like that.
I like the batons.
But it's never consistent, nor is it upgraded. So in Winter Soldier, she gets no, actually, there's nothing in Winter Soldier. She gets the grappling hook stuff, but that's because I give that to them because she never actually really wears the Black Widow costume on an action scene.
She has the nice costume with the blue bits on in Age of Ultron, which to me was going to be like, oh, she's going to electrocute people.
They stepped her up and they gave her a much better suit that had blue lining, as you say, that makes her just stand out on the screen. But they also gave her a red Widow's bite, which again just makes her stand out visually. And they gave her 2 batons that had electricity running through them, which made sense as to why she could fight robots. She would overload them. And then in Civil War, they replaced them with tonfa, which are these sticks that have handles on them that are used in like Japanese martial arts as disarming weapons.
To me, that doesn't work because she's not like a defensive character. She's an attacky character. She's like a tank person.
Downgraded from electric batons to wood.
Why isn't she electrocuting to Chitauri? They have a hive mind.
She tased one of them
too. Yeah, but
she tased one of them.
I know, but like the implication that she has them specifically for Age of Ultron is like a bit.
She tased a Chitauri once. One Chitauri she tased.
What?
The rest she shot with guns.
That bit where she knifes that one in the back and then uses it to. That is iconic.
That's pretty cool.
I did like that. I was sold on that.
So
who
what
else?
about Hawkeye? Because Emma, you were saying
I
some interesting
love
things
him.
about Hawkeye.
I think he
Who?
First of all, what was the public reception to Hawkeye?
Love and acceptance.
It was the opposite. He was the useless Avenger. He shouldn't have been there. What's his character? He's got a bow and arrow.
That's because he's not himself for half the movie. He doesn't have the same introduction as the rest of them. And I think when they did introduce him, it was good.
I feel that did him disjustice, and that's why I feel, Ibby, your suggestion on the last live stream of making him a more integral part of the Thor movie would have done so much wonders for him in this film.
But to be fair, I feel like Black Widow wasn't introduced that well in Iron Man 2, and she still managed to be pretty awesome in this movie. And I think it's just because he didn't have enough time in this movie, and that's fine. And they managed to develop him more in the second Avengers movie, I think.
This is what makes me sad about these movies. It's like, you could just make them an hour longer. Better.
Yeah, but there is that really, like, I hate people saying that Hawkeye is useless. Like, he has a really cool thing, like the whole bow and arrow thing. And, like, there's the really, really great moment when he shoots the arrow at Loki, and, like, you follow the arrow, Loki grabs the arrow, and he's like, what an idiot, and then it explodes. And it's like, Hawkeye's smart. He's a spy like Natasha. He's not just a guy with a bow and arrow.
Also, keeping in mind, it's low-key done, but it is essential. Throughout the fight scenes, Hawkeye is giving the Avengers intel.
Yeah. And he picks up his own arrows. Can we just say that now? That's really
which
good.
is something you don't see in film often. But every single time any character wants to do something, they ask Hawkeye what they should do. Hawkeye is the eyes in the sky, and he's just sort of dealing with his own things as that's going on. And so, whilst he may not have had the most spotlight, he's very integral. And I feel that this movie should have maybe done a bit more to show that. Maybe just give him a character scene.
I mean, they did that with...
There's a cut scene with Loki that was quite good, but I don't remember where it is.
I would have liked to see him face off Loki properly, because Loki was the one who, like, mind controlled him, and obviously he's not gonna, like, and afterwards, like, in later films we see the effects of that, and he's not happy about it. So but I feel like, even though he's like, oh, Loki, it's not good, when he's like talking to Natasha, but he doesn't actually get his moment of, like, punching him, you know? I just want to see him punch him.
I mean, that explosion was good, but, like, if he'd been able to, like, get him afterwards, but he is central at the end scene. I just did, like, the bow thing where they're all stood there, like, over Loki.
There's a lot of good things. And again, his costume, whilst better than Natasha's, was still not iconic enough. He doesn't have a symbol. And I've always felt that's been a problem with Hawkeye, even in the comics. Hawkeye's never had aside from the silly purple costume that I'm sure you know, Ibby.
That's a great costume. Shut up. How dare you?
He's never had a symbol that really made him stand out. Even the Green Arrow is more iconic than Hawkeye.
The thing is, for me, like, Natasha and Clint are the kind of audience substitute characters, because people watching aren't superheroes. They will never be able to be Captain America or Tony Stark, probably, but they could learn to be a spy. Like, the point about them is they're spies, right? So they're not going to dress in flashy costumes. They're not going to be that noticeable visually, because that kind of defeats the point of their characters. So, like, I get that you want it to be iconic, but also it also has to be believable. And I think I'd be a bit weirded out if Natasha was wearing, like, a bright red suit and Hawkeye was there in his purple thing. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Hawkeye's purple thing could be dark purple. I'm just saying this now.
True.
Okay.
I would be down for that.
What I would have liked is maybe for their costumes to develop as they become more of an Avenger than of a spy. So I'd have liked to see more progression in Age of Ultron and so forth.
Have you seen, this is very, very brief because I don't want to go too much into it, but have you seen the concept art for Hawkeye in Civil War? It gave him a mask.
He was in that movie.
So in Civil War, his costume was very, very purple. And it's the color grading of that movie that makes you forget that. But his costume was very purple. It was different, and it had developed. And also, they toyed with the idea of giving him goggles and a mask.
I just want his hearing aids. Give me his hearing aids in this movie.
Also, that. Yeah, they're and then in Infinity War we might get something nice with Hawkeye. But I feel they're trying far more with Hawkeye than they are with Natasha, except they're trying with Hawkeye in terms of costume design and they're trying with Natasha in terms of narrative, but they're not
They
giving
keep
each other
giving her romance stories, and it's not what God wants.
Yeah, but I don't think they're giving her that much romance stories. They're going hard on the Bruce thing, but like
she kisses Steve.
Yeah,
Why?
but she does it to distract people away. Like I don't think it doesn't seem romantic at all to me. It just seems like a tactic. So
my thing is more that like you wouldn't have a male character do that, and for me that's what bugs me. It's like it's a very specific coded to her.
Yeah, but that what I like about her is that she uses her femininity for power. She doesn't necessarily like it annoys me in movies when they have female characters or female heroes and they're just men, but they cast women. And like the thing about like Black Widow is she is a woman.
Interestingly enough, she's I want to agree with what you're saying, but also say she's not a seductress. She's never a seductress.
She's a spy.
Yeah. A lot of times in these kind of movies, you see the woman using her womanly wiles, but she's doing it more genuinely. She's doing it to everybody because it's her only thing that she can do. Whereas Natasha uses it very selectively.
I think my problem more is that there's not another kind of main female character who you can play that off against. So you are, apart from Wanda, who comes in later.
I think it's the one woman problem. It's the strong female character problem.
Yeah. We're at the exclusivity problem again.
Yeah. If you've only got one woman, you have to represent her to be the every woman, and that's never going to work. Like it's also the problem I have with Wonder Woman. But like you can't just have one woman in a group of men and expect her to represent every woman.
What's interesting is that in the original script that got ditched very early on, Ant-Man and the Wasp was supposed to be in this movie.
How?
Now that's uncertain because we don't know much about the original pitch, but Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne as young people were supposed to be in this movie because in the very first Avengers comic, that was the team. They were founding members. Janet even gave them the name the Avengers.
I was going to say, actually, we should talk about who they chose for this movie in terms of just general choices.
And I think that if Janet had been in this movie as the fun woman, as she would have contrasted Natasha's serious woman.
Do they have any fun women, even now?
No.
They're all serious and moody, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And murdery.
The Guardians has Mantis now.
Mantis is not fun. She is sad.
Yeah,
she's funny.
She's depressed. She's depressed.
I'm just realizing there's no happy women.
No.
There's no happy men. There's no one is happy in this movie.
Aside from the idea that everyone has to have a tragic story, if you had to boil a character down to one word, Steve is inspiring, Tony is adaptable, etc., etc., and the Wasp is entertaining.
But she's not even in the Ant-Man movie.
No, Janet Van Dyne's Wasp. Sorry.
Oh right.
Yeah.
Janet Van Dyne is an icon.
Hope Van Dyne's Wasp is resentful.
I'm interested that they chose Hope for the Wasp in the new ones.
The reason being is because of Edgar Wright's Ant-Man, and the reason Ant-Man and the Wasp aren't in this Avengers movie is because of Edgar Wright's Ant-Man. It's all very complex, and that's why I don't want to talk too much about it because we don't know much.
I hope they make Captain Marvel into the positive force that is female.
Yeah.
It's like they haven't got any of those, and it's just hit me, and now I'm freaking out.
I'm so excited for the new Avengers with like Captain Marvel and Black Panther like fronting that, and hopefully Doctor Strange just dying in a ditch somewhere.
So yeah, Ibby, you did raise the idea that let's talk about which superheroes they chose to be the Avengers because it has had a big impact on the world.
Okay, so because I do not know a whole bunch about, well, I didn't when I saw this movie. So for me, just seeing this was like, oh, it's just the Avengers. This is who they are as a team. Why is there only one woman? I guess there's only one woman in the comics. Whatever. I am interested that they chose to bring in, I guess, the Hulk in this movie. and especially that they started with him so early on. And I'm interested that I mean, it's not surprising they chose Captain America, but I know there's rights issues with Spider-Man. But again, they could have chosen a very different lineup, especially in terms of who we had as the audience relatable characters, so that we could have had an entirely different pair of people as Natasha and Clint. So,
easily. They are the most replaceable.
mhm.
And I find it interesting, especially when I was watching Iron Man 2 and Thor, that they were the ones that were brought in.
Yes.
I can't off the top of my head think of really good replacements, but they are certainly, especially compared to the Trinity, you've got to bring them in, and the Hulk as that kind of recognizable character that even if people have never seen the Incredible Hulk, they know the Hulk, right?
Yeah.
Let me just look up some stuff, and you guys keep talking.
So Emma, what do you think? Do you have any idea? Did you in 2012? Did you have any idea what superheroes were out there?
I mean, I'd seen the cartoons when I was younger. I'd seen the Avengers Earth Mightiest Heroes cartoon, and I'd seen a few Spider-Man ones, and stuff like that. But I didn't know.
Did you have any preconceived ideas about the Avengers? Did you have any kind of?
My favourites were Natasha and Clint from back when I watched the cartoon. Even though they're minor characters in that.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. I didn't really remember it because it'd been like a really long time. I really liked Spider-Man, but he wasn't in it. So that's kind of it.
Okay, according to Google, the original team of Avengers Earth Mightiest Heroes is Iron Man, Giant Man, Hulk, Thor, and the Wasp. And then they're joined by Captain America, Black Panther, Hawkeye, and Miss Marvel, and Vision. Later.
Yeah, Ms. Marvel in this case being Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel.
Yes. I'm interested they had both of them in at the same time, and I'm interested that Marvel didn't choose to do that, because you could have a really good dynamic of both captains vying for leadership, but then that wouldn't work with having Tony Stark as well.
Yeah.
We've already covered why a free dynamic would not work.
When the Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver joined, Scarlet Witch and Ms. Marvel had a very nice friendship, and the Wasp was essentially, she was the mother of the group. She was the heart, if you want to go with the 5-man band idea. She was the one who kept everyone together and led the charge with things and kept the men in line, because at the time it was written, that's what female characters were often delegated to.
I feel like you could have had Wasp in here without having Ant-Man. You could have come back to Ant-Man later.
Yeah, and Giant Man at that time was Ant-Man looking to be better.
Ant-Man trying his best.
Yeah, basically. So yeah, it is really interesting to see. And this is what I say in defense of the MCU a lot, is they're trying to tell the story of the history of Marvel Comics in the movies. So and that's because Joss Whedon is a very big nerd. So he would not have allowed. He would not have allowed an Avengers movie to not be those people. He tried hard to get Ant-Man and the Wasp, even though it would have been very difficult and made a lot of things difficult.
That would have been very confusing.
Yeah.
Have a bigger team. Like, I think 6 works really well.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then having Age of Ultron, introducing Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, and Vision as new heroes. No coincidence, they're the next lot that were introduced. He even tried to get Carol Danvers into Age of Ultron at the very end. And Kevin Feige was like, there's no way we can do this without confusing everything.
I'm so glad that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. I feel like we are robbed in this series. I mean, I'm going on to Age of Ultron now, of a Scarlet Witch and Natasha Romanoff friendship. That could have been really positive.
Like, there's allowed to be women, but they're not allowed to interact. Haha.
No,
that's why I'm very excited for the Wasp to join things, for Captain Marvel to join things, and also for Scarlet Witch to start interacting with various other characters. Including Doctor Strange, because I feel that alongside Doctor Strange, she will develop into more of a well-rounded character.
You know how they're doing a Black Widow movie?
Yeah.
I think it would be better to do a Scarlet Witch movie.
Oh,
like, she's way more interesting.
Both.
No, definitely both. But like, I think Scarlet Witch is like, I feel like Black Widow should have been years ago, whereas Scarlet Witch should be now.
There's no way they're not saying Black Widow movie in the past. It cannot be happening in the future. That does not work.
No.
Yeah.
So we have to get the Red Room.
Can we talk about Joss Whedon's writing? Because
Go
I've
on.
been thinking about it, and like when I originally watched this, it was like really engaging because it's really fast and like quippy and stuff. But when I was rewatching it today, literally like Tony Stark's lines a lot of them don't feel right. Like he feels kind of soulless because he's just quip, and like I'm like, where is the Tony that I know from the Iron Man movies where he actually says things that mean something? Like he has some great lines, like when he's talking to Bruce and stuff like that. But it just,
I think the chemistry of this cast really carries this.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I find the script fine. It's like engaging and stuff. It was funny the first few times you watch it, but like the chemistry between the actors is really good.
Yeah.
Everyone gets along, and you can feel that, and you can feel like they're a team. And that is one of the few things Joss Whedon does well, is in terms of writing like ensemble casts. So you see that with Firefly, which is tip top, except slowly you realise he can only write one type of female character, and you kind of go.
So the biggest issue with Joss Whedon is he is a genius in storytelling. He is a massive nerd who's very experienced and knows what works and what doesn't. And his dialogue is some of the most quotable, most memorable, and also a lot of it has great meaning. Like there's a reason a lot of it winds up on posters. And that's what I feel like Zack Snyder does well as well. I know he doesn't write much, but they both have the ability to write lines that have depth. And feel like speeches. However, Joss Whedon falls down on his inability to adapt with the times and his inability to experiment. And that's why I feel that Age of Ultron was a good point for him to bow out on. He developed his own characters, he developed his own themes, and then he gave it away. Well, he didn't give it away, he was fired, pretty much.
Thank God.
But I feel that he's really good to bring in and then get rid of.
Just thank God he's not doing Batgirl the movie. Like,
yeah.
Go the fuck away.
Batgirl the movie in 1990s by Joss Whedon, yes please. Batgirl the movie in the 2010s by Joss Whedon, no thanks.
No thank you. I think he needs to go on a course about intersectional feminism and maybe talk to some real life women who aren't his wife or the woman he cheated on her with.
Yeah.
Wow. A while ago, Jules put in the chat, I want to talk about Loki and how Joss Whedon does not get Loki, and we haven't really spoken about Loki.
Interesting.
I'm ready.
Do you want to go?
Okay, so I do not have a huge problem with Loki in this movie. I find people who are like, oh, he suddenly turns into a fascist in this movie have not really understood the whole arc of Thor, where he does really want to be king. But also, you know, his lines where he's like, oh, you crave subjugation. And then literally he's in change for 90% of every other movie. It's like, yeah, Loki, that sounds like a you thing. Just saying.
I'm projecting.
Yeah. But I think it is clear that he's not the big bad of this movie. Like, it is made clear that there's other people kind of pulling the strings, but not in a way that I agree with fangirls, I'm using that word broadly, who are like, oh yeah, he didn't mean to do anything, he was tortured. Like
me in 2012.
Same. But like, I feel like his character is more complicated than that. So even if he was tortured, I think that there's something in him that does want this, and he does crave being worshipped. But Arno is saying he remembers me saying this. He'll remember all my other comments during this movie as well. But yes, also the costume designing for Loki in this movie is really good. I really like all the spikes because it makes him seem like more aggressive and dangerous. And I read this whole Tumblr meta post about it, which was really interesting, and how it differs from the Thor movie. But also, I don't feel like Loki in the films is not really the same as comic book Loki.
Absolutely not.
Like, they've gone...
Comic book Loki has so much more to him and so much history that you can't adapt into the film.
Yeah, exactly. Because he's such an iconic character, you can only bring a certain amount of that. And as the god of chaos, like for me in these movies, Loki is not the god of chaos. Like, at all. You do not get that whatsoever. You do a little bit in Ragnarok, but also then they forget that he does magic, so whatever. He's the god of... I don't really know what's going on here.
Mischief.
Like, he is the god of mischief, but that's not really established earlier on, is it?
I just find it strange in this movie. It's not this movie that I find strange. Like, if I just watch this movie on its own, I'd be like, okay, I get who Loki is in this.
Mhm.
But it's what they do with him afterwards and how he has like a kind of redemption arc, but also not. And like, how can he go from being like a bit of a kind of Hitler-esque figure to being likable like a couple movies down the line? It just feels like
likable in this. Like
he has like a vibe, but like
I remember like he was like a lot of people. Well, I mean that's his natural chemistry, I guess, of the cast. But at the same time, like people really loved this. And what Jules says in the chat that he wants to be king, but he should want to be king in order to cause anarchy. That is who mythological Loki is. That is who mostly sort of modern comic book Loki is, apart from that weird time in Blood Brothers when he accidentally did sort of become king for a while, and then that was a mistake and he was sad the whole time. But yeah, for me, this is not Loki, the god of chaos. This is Loki as interpreted by Joss Whedon. And it's fine. I don't have a huge problem with Loki in these movies. But there's a lot that could have happened and I miss it.
Yeah. I enjoy his dialogue because we've talked before about how Shakespearean the Asgardians are. And how we've given our opinions on whether or not they should lean into that. But Joss Whedon leaned into it heavily with Thor and Loki in this movie, and I feel it works very,
it works because
well.
both of them are doing it.
Yeah. And they kind of make fun of it with like Tony Stark being like, "Doth mother know you weareth her drapes?"
Honestly, that was
like,
iconic.
Yeah. So they're not just like doing it and being too serious with it.
It also goes well to make Loki actually threatening. In scenes where he is talking to, where he's threatening people, you feel the weight of his words, which then makes the Hulk moment even better.
I enjoy Loki in this movie. Like, I don't see him as a bad villain. Like, I think he's just a complicated character, and honestly, I think complicated characters and anti-hero characters make the best villains. Like, for me, that's what compels me to rewatch films. This is why this film and probably Ragnarok and The Winter Soldier are like part of my top movies, and probably like Guardians of the Galaxy as well, because you have that with Nebula as well. It's like, just I like complicated, and I like to be able to play that, how they bring out the darkness of the main hero and to work that off it. And I mean, I wouldn't say he's necessarily an anti-hero, but that's the closest word I can think of to really.
He's more like an anti-villain. He's like a guy who's trying to be a villain.
He's just like a chaotic, neutral person.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that brings out like qualities in Thor that is what's good about Thor: The Dark World, which we will come into. It's one redeeming quality.
So I want to talk about Loki in terms of how he's being sent on a quest, how he's being manipulated, and how Thanos comes into it.
Yeah, that's what I thought was really interesting rewatching it, because I completely forgotten all that stuff about how like he's on another planet and he's talking to this dude who's like, "I will kill you if you don't do what you're supposed to do."
So this is ignoring the
guy who loves The Rock. He's my fave.
His name is The Other.
I know what his name is, but I just call him the guy who loves The Rock.
Okay? Fine. But this is technically the first Marvel movie to hint at expanded universe stuff. This is the first one that made it explicit to the general audience that there is more going on here than you know. How do you feel it was handled? Did you react to it at the time?
Everyone in the cinema did, and I was just like, "Who the fuck is this dude?"
I was really confused, and I didn't get it until I literally watched it back today, and was like, "Oh, that's Thanos."
I had to look it up. I was like, "Who is the purple man at the end of Avengers?"
Also, he has a really derpy face. I was laughing about it for ages afterwards because he's just like,
"Oh no."
So how did that make you feel at the time that you didn't know what
I was like, "Oh, what's going on? Oh, there's more. Oh, I need to like get into this season. Maybe that's already been revealed. Maybe this has happened. Oh, what's going on? I need to watch the next movie." You know, that part of the mystery of Thanos, and also the mystery of what lies beyond the 9 realms, because this is the first time we go outside them. Even though the world has been opened up for us in Thor, that's still very confined.
It's not quite
within
clear
Asgard.
what Asgard is,
and that should have been made clear.
Especially considering something I've always thought interesting was Thor even though he's an Asgardian, first and foremost, he is also an alien, and due to that, what's explored in comics quite well is how Thor interacts with other alien races, and how he's just kind of matter-of-factly aware of the intergalactic politics. Like, if you were somehow able to step into this Avengers movie and talk to these characters, if you said to Thor, so tell me about Ronan the Accuser, he could. And I feel that the fact that Loki was communicating with Thanos and being threatened by the other and showing that Loki isn't the biggest threat in the universe, I feel this movie handled it well, but only upon reflection. At the time, even I was a little bit tuning out during those scenes.
What I don't like about it is where it's set. So on like a random rocky place in space. Like I think it would be much more dynamic if it was in like a throne room or something that was more memorable, because I just forgot those scenes existed, and I think it's partially because of the way they were presented to me in like a dark, murky way.
Definitely. Fully agreed.
Yeah. What I do like, however, oh god, I've forgotten. Hang on.
I like how Thanos is never shown until the post-credit scene.
Okay, what I do
is like his secretary.
About these movies is how there is a withholding of information. So there's stuff that we, the audience, know, and like because we've seen all the movies, we know, and we've seen from different perspectives. But the characters do not communicate. And like Loki knows all this shit about the Infinity Stones. Thor fucking goes off and looks for them, and then but Loki they don't communicate about looking for them in any way. And then they've got like the Guardians over there, and it's like a really complicated, and that's why you can't wait for everyone to come together, because you're like, finally, they're going to share information. And like the fact that we know and we see behind Loki's motivations beyond him just being like, you know, I would say he is power crazed in this movie. This is the worst version of him as himself. This is like the most King Loki comic book version of him.
Yeah.
But it still works because, you know, we have to redeem him in order for, like, I think for the rest of the movies to work, especially since we are so sympathetic to him in the first movie, in the Thor movies. Because I've said this before, like, he's as much the parent. No, it's as much his movie as anyone else's. But for me, you know, it's really compelling in that no one knows the whole picture in the same way that the audience do. And that is almost something we share with Thanos, in that Thanos seems to know everything that is going on.
Audience character.
See, I'm slightly convinced that this movie is going to be like we're going to see from Thanos' perspective. I was convinced that was what was happening in Infinity War, but apparently not. But I'm excited for it to be Gamora's movie. I hope it is. I love her.
It has been said that Infinity War will focus on Thanos a lot, and we see that with sort of the flashback in the trailer. I have some final comments from James, who has sent them from the great beyond. He says, initially, love this film. It's clean, it's tight, not a single scene that feels oversaturated or gritty. And I feel that aside from how we talk about the Thanos bits being a little bit weird, there's no sag, there's no loose ends, except from the ones that are supposed to draw you in. There's no low point of this film where you're like, all right, get to the good bit.
Nothing is accidental. It's all very purposeful, precise.
Absolutely. He also says Bruce, Tony, and Steve are all angels. The movie does them justice, and Infinity War better treat them right.
Everyone is going to die.
Nothing against her as a character. He sort of dislikes the way she's handled. It's not terrible, but it very much feels like token female, very much feels like women and girls are feminine and weak and bad, but not Black Widow. She's different. Hello, boys. He says, please give us a diverse representation of characters who are female, who are characters first, female second, like Peggy, MJ, and Liz Allen. Liking her get-up in Infinity War actually looks practical this time around. Why does
there's a boob bit.
Is there a boob bit?
There's a zip. It's the same.
I still quite like how it's gone green. But anyway,
I like green.
That's moving forward.
I support the green.
So thank you, James, for those thoughts, and thank you for joining us. Do we have any final thoughts on Avengers as a piece of history and where it set things up to go from there?
It's a classic. That's what I say. And I think I'm right for once. I say most films are a classic, but I think this one actually is. And I think it's going to be remembered for a long, long time as a good, solid superhero movie that started a universe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even think you need to watch any other movies after this one. Like, if you're not into superhero movies in a big way, like, if you were going to
say, live stream stop here, this is the last one.
Done.
You're not the rest of them.
If you were just going to, like, set up, I don't know, a list of, like, 5 superhero films for aliens to watch or something, it would be this one, fucking Scott Pilgrim, and then, like, Kick-Ass, Batman, and maybe, I don't know, Spider-Man. Something like that. Like, you do not need to see any of the MCU before or after this movie to understand. It's very self-contained, but it also does reference the outer movies in a really good way, that it draws on them, and that makes the film richer for people who have seen them. It's not so much that it's lost for people who are seeing it from the first time. And also, Jules, I don't know which Batman. I've not seen any of them.
Tim Burton one. Definitely.
Lego Batman for life.
You're right. Lego Batman is the best Batman movie, and it's the only one you ever need to see.
Yep, that's the only one I've seen. It's fine. I'm good.
But yes, I feel that as a comic book nerd and as someone who grew up reading all this and having people around me being like, that's a really weird thing to do, this movie not only legitimized my hobby, which is always a very nice thing for a young boy who's like, oh, no one understands me. It's a very nice thing. But also what it did was it opened it up. So it wasn't just like Spider-Man was. Spider-Man legitimized it for a lot of younger people than me. But Spider-Man was just, oh, I've finally seen an adaptation of my story. What this movie did was open it up and say, yo, you've had superhero movies. Now you've had the team-up movie. Anything is possible. Go wild. And we're going wild. We've had Guardians of the Galaxy. We're having Infinity War. We're having Black Panther and Wonder Woman. Nothing is impossible now.
Is a happy woman. Final thoughts.
Sad reaction.
Happy women don't exist. like if you cry over Tim.
But yeah, what you said about this movie opening things up, again, I think that's like, you know, part of how many fan works this movie did spawn. Like, this is the beginning of the Marvel MCU fandom. Just like, it goes from being kind of a niche-ish corner of like the internet with like a few fanfics, and most of them are like comic based rather than film based, because no one has really interacted in the film universe. And the chemistry in this film and the dynamics between the characters that are established are fascinating, and you can go in so many directions with everyone in this movie.
I remember being like, I ship everyone.
Same. I ship everyone.
I was like, Science Bros and
Tashi for life. Bye. Just see myself out.
Yeah. So this movie, aside from all others, made the superhero fandom. It made the idea that you can do a comic book movie about anything and people will buy it. And it just solidified things. There is no superhero culture without the Avengers.
I think that's a good thought to end on.
I think so too. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the host in particular. Thank you to the audience for supplying us with brilliant comments to work from. And thank you everyone involved in making these films. That's I think something important. So we've now finished phase 1. Moving on to phase 2, we'll talk about Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World, hopefully next Saturday at 8 p.m.
Yeah, and next time we promise to have guests, because we've kind of talked this time. We got used to doing that last time, and now
we forgot to bring people.
Sorry, people.
Sorry about that.
Jules, come talk to us now.
Yeah, I'll send a link to Jules. Yeah, do you want to do a little shout out as to like who you are and what you do?
I'm Emma. I have a YouTube channel. But everyone who's watching knows who I am anyway. There's no point. Don't worry about it. It's fine. You don't need to subscribe to me. I've got enough subscribers. I started waving and now I can't stop.
Ibby, save me.
Well, I'm Ibby. I'm very famous on YouTube. I have like 50,000 subscribers, as you all know. So I don't need your subscribers either. Thanks. Although you can follow me on Twitter and like my tweets because they are excellent.
Can confirm.
What a mess. All right, thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Okay.
I'm going to press the
Bye.
stop button. Goodbye. Say bye.
Bye.
Keep saying bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.